Hello and welcome to this new series of lectures that seek to explore the way literary theory developed after the heyday of post-structuralism. Post-structuralism was a major stop in the history of literary theory in that it turned a skeptical eye towards almost all classical frameworks supplied by literary theory. One of the long-standing interdisciplinary theories that made a difference to readings in literature, readings in film, readings of culture is psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis undergoes several revisions during post-structuralism. Maybe you remember that psychoanalysis and the history of this discipline begins with Sigmund Freud in the beginning of 20th century. At the turn of the century, in the first 2 decades of the century, you have this new discipline, new interdisciplinary discipline emerging. And Freud was a path-breaking psychoanalyst, in fact, the pioneer who single-handedly puts the idea that human mind is not a neurological reality, neither can it be understood by pharmacopic apparatus. Freud tried to look at human mind through analysis of dreams. He tried to make sense of human mind as a tired reality, layered reality, three-tiered reality to be precise. He proposed that human mind can be understood as composing of the unconscious, the subconscious and the conscious, or alternatively id, ego and the superego. He would theorize that the outermost layer of human mind, which is like conscious, it's like a thin sheet which could be broken by the other powerful layers of the reality called psyche, mind. At any given point of time, you may have your subconscious meddling with this thin sheet, namely conscious. In sum, he was trying to say that human mind's reality is not a noble positive reality that you would ascribe to the conscious, but the libidinal dark reality that is held by the subconscious and the unconscious. And this theory was immediately followed by the idea of a child's developmental stages. And this is where Freud brings about, Freud proposes something that is so revolutionary in the history of the study of the human mind, at least the Western human mind. Freud proposes the idea of Oedipus complex, Oedipal complex otherwise. So he would rely on the mythology of the Grecian king Oedipus, who was cursed but then would try to escape the curse, but will end up doing exactly what the curse fated him to do: kill his father and have sex with his mother. Freud uses that very old ancient Greek epic story to describe a fundamental psychological state in all human beings. Freud says, every human being, every human child born goes through this stage of attraction, affiliation, affinity towards the mother and animosity towards the father. Oedipal energies go into consolidating mature adult attitudes that a normally grown person would exhibit in society. Oedipal complex becomes the central idea the central force in a person's development, mental, psychological development. This idea was so popular, it became so popular, it started getting into policy making, in educational reforms, in this industry of counseling, therapies. It was just everywhere. The idea of Oedipal complex, the idea of Oedipal energy, it could be just seen everywhere. In every discussion of social transactions, in every discussion of educational reforms, in art, in dance, in theatre. Oedipal ideas regarding Oedipal energy, interpretations of Oedipal complex, they became very common. Post-structuralism stopped this fad of identifying Oedipal energies in almost all systems of human transactions. How did it stall? How did it go against? How did it stop the popularity of Oedipal discussions, Oedipal energies? Well, the book that spearheaded this attack is titled Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. This book was written by Deleuze and Guattari. Again, these people are like French philosophers, very popular post-modern French philosophers. They argued that Oedipal complex is a limiting framework. The universal and liberal way, the generous liberal way in which Oedipal energy is used to explain away human complexities is unfounded. They spoke of how Freud was using an extremely restrictive familial and psychological ground to propose this theory. They spoke of how Freud was not focusing on deterritorialization and reterritorialization, two ideas that we will come back to in a minute or two. They spoke of how Freud was cancelling out the actual play of desire and flow. They spoke of how capitalism and schizophrenia are connected. It is this move spearheaded by Deleuze and Guattari that later became known by the name schizoanalysis. Schizoanalysis was an antidote to psychoanalysis. I say antidote because there has been other revisions of psychoanalysis. Jacques Lacan, another French theorist, he intervened in the history of psychoanalysis. He used language, the structure of language, to understand the structure of unconscious. So he has his own theories, and he calls those theories a return to Freud. He calls himself the real Freudian. Lacan calls himself the real Freudian. And he calls his school the return to Freud. But in Anti-Oedipus, we don't see a return to Freud. We see a resistance to Freud. We see a rejection of Freud. We see the establishment of a thought structure that Deleuze and Guattari calls rhizomatic in structure. Human thought structures, according to Deleuze and Guattari, is not like the root of a tree. The root of a tree has a main root and sub-roots that grow out of it. Deleuze and Guattari said, our thought system, our thought structure does not behave like that. It doesn't have this main root and sub-roots. Instead, it behaves like a rhizome. It behaves like a rhizome plant that has multiple nodes, all of which are equally important. So you cannot prioritize one thing and then sideline other things and say that we are defined by the main root. That is not how human thought mechanism works. Human thought mechanism is complex, networked, connected, scattered, rhizomatic, and we shouldn't be delimiting ourselves to think of a certain structure that is monolithic, that is all powerful. We shouldn't be using such structures to understand human mind and human thought. We should be able to think of how human civilization and human thought have a tendency to break away from established structures. In other words, deterritorialization. And founding new establishments is also a connected phenomena, which is like reterritorialization. So Deleuze and Guattari basically posits this theory. They bring about this revolutionary new theory that talks about the pitfalls that we fall into when we blindly use Oedipal energy or Oedipal explanations that are based on Oedipal complex. When we use that liberally in social sciences, we jump into several stalemates. Schizoanalysis seeks to remove these stalemates. One major angle in which schizoanalysis invests is when Deleuze and Guattari, or the later schizoanalysts, they started analyzing capitalism. You would find like Slavoj Zizek, a major name in postmodern, post-structural psychoanalysis. If we focus on how Zizek analyzes cinema, or how he develops a critique on capitalism, we will see how anti-Oedipus is this anti-Oedipal idea, or the schizoanalysis idea, is put into practice. Traditionally, classically, capitalism is understood as an economic mechanism. It is understood in Marxian terms as a mechanism of exploitation. And Marxism seeks to effectively resist the evil of capitalism. Marxism seeks to resist it by bringing together a proletariat revolution. In the schizoanalytic perspective, capitalism is more about emotion. You need to understand how capitalism moves forward, banking on the emotional selves of human beings. The desire machine, the machinery that produces desire, that is the machinery that drives capitalism forward. And in this case, if you look at capitalism as a function of desire, if you look at capitalism as a production and reproduction of desire, if you look at capitalism as a tendency to produce, the desire to purchase, then Marxism would act as its emotional antithesis. It is, the whole theory is trying to show us how it is not just about economics. It is also about emotional angles. The desire to own, the desire to archive, the desire to dispense, the desire and the ability to buy, these things are basically emotional in nature. Of course, the desire, any desire is emotional in nature. And you cannot use economic vocabulary to completely capture the essence of that emotion. You will need to acknowledge desire and flow. You will need to acknowledge the rhizomatic way in which a human mind works, human thought systems work. Schizoanalysis brings into perspective how emotional transactions desire transactions, desire production, how these things are extremely important. When you start accounting for the capitalist society, when you start accounting for the way in which Hollywood cinema works, probably we need to look at how the emotional self of a contemporary human being, how that is a major stake in all these transactions. We have to also look at schizoanalysis in terms of in terms of in terms of a philosophical movement. It seeks to destabilize the idea that we need to be logical, we need to be objective, we need to be factual when it comes to create an analytical tool. Like psychoanalysis made that mistake. According to Deleuze and Guattari, psychoanalysis makes the mistake of being logical. It makes the mistake of being analytical in a very rational way. Schizoanalysis is trying to bring in the volatility, the volatile nature of emotions, the volatile nature of desire into modes of analysis, modes of analysis of society, modes of analysis of culture, modes of analysis of educational transactions. Despite the fact that schizoanalysis had followers, despite the fact that schizoanalysis effectively resisted psychoanalytic frameworks, it has not been integrated into policy making mechanisms. The inferences have not been used outside the philosophy itself. It has not had major stakes in general practice of psychoanalysis. The Freudian psychoanalysis still happens to be the cornerstone around which therapies run. Deleuze and Guattari and their intervention still stands as a one-off voice, as an old voice in the history of thoughts about human mind and its complexities. Thank you.